Hi everyone, and welcome to my coverage of the World Chess Championship 2014. I'm a little behind, but I'll catch up over the next day or so. Today we saw a great game in the second round, and I thought that's what we'd look at now. Carlsen had white, and he opened with e4, which was good to see. Too often World Championship matches see d4 after d4, game after game, with queen's gambits and all of those kind of solid but also kind of dull openings. E4 generally leads to sharper and more tactical games, so it was a good indicator for this game and for the match. Game 1 had been a draw, so it was good to see how this one progressed. So Vishy answered symmetrically with e5, and the game went into a Roy Lopez with knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. And now knight f6 from Anand, the Berlin variation, where the main line sees white castling now, and after knight takes e4, an early queen trade and a long strategical game with black having the bishop pair and white having a majority of pawns on the king side. But Carlsen sidestepped all of that now with d3. So there's no knight takes e4, of course, after white castles, and this is what leads to the main line Berlin. So now the game followed the main line of the d3 variation, with both players developing their pieces to good squares and castling. So bishop c5, and Carlsen castled. Also playable is c3 with d4 coming soon. So castles now d6 and rook e1. And in both of my databases, this is the novelty of the game. As I mentioned in the pre-match video, it's very hard to prepare against Carlsen as he plays such a range of openings. It's curious to wonder whether this is something he prepared or whether he decided to play it over the board. It's definitely a move that makes a lot of sense anyway, as we'll see. So Anand now castled, and Carlsen took the option to double the black pawns at the expense of the bishop pair. Bishop takes c6, so b takes c6. And Carlsen is a brilliant strategical player, and his choice of making this exchange shows that he's approaching the game with a fixed strategy in mind, predominantly focused around restricting Anand as much as possible. First he played h3, preventing this annoying pin, bishop g4, and after rook e8 he played knight bd2. And the reason that black is restrained here is because he wants to play d5. In order to liberate his game and put some pressure on the white position on e4. Carlsen's choice of exchanging on c6 means that e5 will now be vulnerable if black ever plays d5, because after e takes d5, c takes d5 is obviously preferred, but then the knight and the rook are attacking e5. So this is why it's prophylaxis. It stops black from advancing in the center, which obviously is a good thing for white. And this is another reason why it was necessary to prevent bishop g4, because obviously the knight is a crucial component in attacking e5. So we're entering a slow maneuvering kind of game. And Anand continued with knight d7, figuring that his knight will be better placed on a different square, so he's rerouting it there. It's going to go f8 and then g6. And also he has the option of playing f5 now, maybe, to chip away at the white center. So Carlsen now further reinforced his grip on the d5 advance with knight c4. So it's another piece attacking e5. And there's actually a threat of knight a5 now, and it's very awkward to defend c6. Probably black has to play knight b8, which is a bit crazy. So Anand played bishop b6 just to control a5. And now this means that white can continue with a4, which, amongst other ideas that we'll see shortly, gives black the concern that his bishop might be getting trapped after a5, although that's not actually the case. But there's still a risk, and it will force the play, so black is better off just to nip that in the bud completely and play a5 in response. And Carlsen now exchanged off the knight with knight takes b6, so c takes b6, and the pawn structure is repaired, but black no longer has the bishop pair. And and also the black pawns have been brought forward slightly and therefore weakened a little, which will become relevant later. The main point, however, is that now white can advance in the center with d4. This keeps pressure on e5, and means that he can't reroute the knight just yet, and he can't advance in the center with d5. So that's still the main idea of what's going on here. And Anand doesn't want to trade, so he continued with queen c7 to defend e5, and again making d5 possible for black, and also to reroute the knight safely, because there's a problem with takes, and white can take here because of the pressure between the queens. So yeah, so he played queen c7, and if, for example, he plays instead e takes d4, white is doing well after knight takes d4 with a great central knight and initiative due to the attack on c6 with, you know, a small edge that's starting to grow. So now after queen c7, that was if black played e takes d4. So what Anand played was queen c7, and now Carlsen played rook a3, a very nice move. It's been made possible by the a4 push, and now from a3 it can swing across the third rank, either to the center to support central play, or to squares like f3 and g3. And we'll see what ideas Carlsen has as the game continues. So Anand continued now with the maneuvering of his knight, with knight f8, and now we saw Carlsen give up the central tension in order to implement a concrete plan. So d takes e5. Generally, white wants to maintain this tension as long as possible, only give it up if he gets something in return. So that's what Carlsen is doing here. So d takes e5, and now knight h4. He's decided on a kingside attack, as he's seen that he can outnumber Anand with pieces there. So rook d8, and black is taking the d file here. White can play rook d3, but Carlsen wants to attack instead. So instead he plays the actually much stronger than rook d3, queen h5, and there's pressure is just starting to build against the black king. So f6, and now knight f5, getting the knight to a great attacking square. So bishop e6, which is also a good square for the bishop, but black already has to take heed with his kingside. One slip and he's in dire straits here. G6 of course isn't working because of knight h6 check. And you know, black's going to regret weakening his dark squares because bishop h6 is coming and it's going to be a disaster. And in the press conference after the game, both players agreed that queen f7 instead of bishop e6, directly challenging the white queen, was probably a better move in order to defend here. So queen f7. Now queen e2 is what Carlsen felt was best in response, but he also thought that black was probably fine after knight e6, and the engines give white a small advantage but nothing huge. But anyway, in the game, bishop e6, and now Carlsen continued with a rook at g3 with the immediate threat of taking on g7. And we can see that suddenly there's a lot of pieces appearing in front of the black king, so the pressure is on. And Anand played knight g6, so this just obviously takes away this pressure. And this is the piece set up that he's elected in order to defend, with some simplification ideas if necessary. So h4 is how Carlsen continued, starting to squeeze black on the king side, as well on the queen side, with a4 played here to slow down the advance of the pawns. And you know, Carlsen has a knack for keeping the pressure on his opponent and giving him constant problems to solve. The idea with this move, h4, is queen f3 and then h5, renewing the pressure on g7 with the knight and the rook. And if black ever trades on f5 to solve these problems, then it's good for white, as we'll see in a moment, because that's what Vishy decided to do in the end. And you know, h4 is the move recommended by the engines as well, but there's another interesting line that we should look at, and that's bishop h6, an engine kind of moves. It was mentioned in the press conference, and strong engines will find it quite quickly, but Carlsen felt there was no mate here, but only a perpetual check, and that's true. There is no mate, but it does lead to some interesting tactics. Rook d7 is one way to defend, but let's say black takes, so g takes h6, and then the idea is a rook g6, hg6, queen g6 check, and white is now rook down, but the initiative is considerable. Black's play is forced, has to be king f8. If instead king h8, queen takes h6, it's crushing. King h7 is forced. Black is going to get mated if king g8 with rook e3 to g3. But now comes queen h6 check, king g8, and now rook e3 anyway. And white is winning because black will have to play king f7 in order to avoid getting mated. But then queen h7 is going to pick up the loose queen on c7. So back to king f8 was the right move instead of king h8. And now queen takes h6 check, forces king e8. Again, if king g8, then rook e3 is winning, and if king f7, then queen h7. And now queen takes f6, threatening queen takes e6. So bishop f5, e f5, and white has 3 passed pawns for the rook, and he's going to pick up another passed pawn or 2 as well, and he's able to keep the pressure. But it has to be said that it remains an objectively equal position with counterplay ideas for black, and to some extent the pressure is gone from the black position. So unless you have a forcing win of material or a mate, you shouldn't relieve the pressure for unless you have those things. So h4 is what Carlsen played to increase the pressure. So bishop f5 from Vishy, which is quite a risky choice because white is definitely better after this exchange and the further exchanges that follow. A safer option, although passive, was rook d7, where the engines claim equality after queen f3, knight f4, and h5, but the pressure is on black here, and it's not easy for a human to deal with this pressure. Okay, if it's an engine, then you can just see with complete clarity, but from a human point of view, there's a big psychological pressure in such a position. So e takes f5, and now knight f4, which is pretty much forced. If knight e7, then bishop h6 is winning, and if knight f8, again bishop h6 is crushing. For example, rook d7, now rook e4 with rook g4. It's just this f5 pawn after the trade is very nice for white. This makes g6 not viable, and it's just going to be a very powerful play. So knight f4 is forced. So now bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and we're going into well, I guess you could still say it's middle game, but it's going into an end game really, where white is still keeping an edge. Rook c3 immediately attacking c6, and there's ideas like rook e6 and queen f3, but also rook c4 to e4 with domination on the e file. And it's important to note that black, he can't challenge white's control of the e file with rook e8 because the queen is also controlling the square. So it's a very nice positional factor for white. So Anand answered with c5, which is liquidating this pressure on c6, and he's definitely on the defensive now, and there are many weaknesses in his positions, pawns and squares. So this is very nice as far as Carlsen's concerned, of course, and he's ensured that there's no counterplay for black and that he can continue to press and strengthen his position. It's exactly the kind of chess in which he excels. So here he continued with rook e6, and this pressure on b6 means that black isn't able to play queen f7 to at least challenge the white queen from its control of the e file, and if it's traded, then it makes it much easier for black. So Anand played a rook a b8 to defend b6 and also to play b5 later with some kind of counterplay. The engines and some commentators online preferred h6 here, giving the king some breathing space and not allowing Carlsen the powerful continuation that he was now able to play. After rook a b8, he played a rook c4. It's an innocuous looking move, but it has some very strong ideas in mind. White can round up at the f4 pawn anytime he likes, but Carlsen has seen that there are positional elements at stake that are far more significant than the paltry winning of a pawn. So Anand now played queen d7, which the engines give as best. If he plays queen f7 now, White answers queen e2 with a similar idea as the game, which we'll see shortly. So queen d7, and now king h2, because black was threatening queen d1 check. It's forcing off the queens, which obviously white doesn't want, because its queen is constituting quite a big portion of the pressure. And you know, the fact that black has to defend weaknesses means that white is able to strengthen his pieces more and more. So it's a very nice play from Carlsen. So Anand played rook f8, which is in fact an inaccuracy, and is clearly feeling the pressure both on the board and on the clock, because they're starting to get into a slight bit of time trouble here. So now Carlsen can play rook c e4, and this means that his queen can come to e2, and his domination is going to be there on the e file, as we'll see in a second. And what happened with Anand is that he's seen that this control of the e file is coming, and that there's going to be mate threats if his rook stayed on d8, with rook e8 threatened if the queen moves away. So this is why he played rook f8, so rook e8 isn't going to be check. And this is wrong, definitely, from Anand. He's definitely feeling the pressure, and it does take away the mating threats, but he had to try something else here, such as b5, as mentioned. And white, for his part, would like to play rook e7 on the next move, and then something like queen g4. So Anand played rook b7, and if rook e7 is going to give up his queen for two rooks, and he'd be more than happy to do that. The rooks are almost always better. So Carlsen played queen e2. So this is a great move and a very nice position. Now I can't remember the last time we saw Alekhine's gun in a world championship match. So white now has absolute domination of the e file, although he has no direct tactical threats. The problem as far as black's concerned is that white can now continue with moves like b3 and h5, h6, and this is going to ensure that black is getting ever closer to zugzwang, and then he can simply round up the f4 pawn, get a rook on the 7th, and advance to victory with the kingside pawns. Or wherever he wants. He can also play on the queen side. He's in control of the entire position. This e-file domination and the 7th rank coming is very, very nice position. Prospects are very good from here. So Anand played b5. He's going for counterplay and at least trying to mix things up a little in Carlsen's attack. And the latter responded calmly with b3. Just keeping everything solid. It's tempting to go to the 7th with the rook e7 here. It's seemingly very strong actually, but black has the tricky reply queen d6, and he doesn't have to worry about rook takes b7 because of f3 check from the queen, winning the white queen. And this obviously white would avoid this, but the fact that he would have to spend a move doing that means that he would lose a significant amount of his advantage. So that's why Carlsen played b3 instead. There's no need to rush here whatsoever. He can take his time. He's in complete control of the position, and black has no threats. So b takes a4, b takes a4, and now rook b4. Anand tries to get material off, which is understandable given the onslaught he's faced with, but Carlsen is finding all of the best moves. Now he plays rook e7, getting the 7th rank. We know from Nimzovich that the goal of the occupation of any file is to get to the 7th and 8th ranks as quickly as possible. And here it's coming with tempo and threats on the black king, so it's ideal. So queen d6, which is the best move. If instead rook e4, white is well ahead after queen e4. The black queen has to move. The only reasonable move is queen c8. Then, for example, rook a7 with the threat of queen e7 forcing mate. So queen e8, and now simply queen takes f4, and white's gonna mop up with these queenside pawns and win easily. Also bad for black. Sorry, instead of queen d6 is queen takes f5. This pawn is hanging. It's a poison pawn because it's losing tactically to rook takes b4, and black can't actually recapture without getting mated. For example, a takes b4, queen c4 check, king h8, now queen f7. It's a crushing tactical continuation that's utilizing the back rank problem of the black king. Mate is threatened with queen takes f8 and also with queen takes g7. So moves like queen c8 to defend don't work. Black has to play rook g8, but now simply rook e8, and there's no way to avoid the mate. So that's another way that black could have gone wrong. But Vishy is no amateur, of course, so he's not going to fall for simple tactics like that. So Carlsen continued with queen f3 and the threat of rook 4 e6. He couldn't play that on this move because f3 check is in the position still. In this case, it's not going to win the queen because the black queen would have been attacked as well after rook 4 e6. But what it would lead to is a queen exchange and approximately equal endgame. It's a tiny advantage to white, but in the position as it stands now, he has a huge advantage in the position as over a pawn. So obviously he wants to maintain that instead. So rook takes e4. Apparently this move is forced, but white is retaining a very nice advantage at over a pawn with very good chances of winning the endgame after queen takes e4. So Anand now played f3 check, and Carlsen responded g3, which is the best move, again keeping everything solid. And Carlsen's control of the e-file means that the rook on f8 can't move out into the game because of the threat of rook e8 check and forcing mate. So Anand now decided to deal with that, but overlooked a crushing move, perhaps due to the time trouble, and probably he was just completely drained from having to defend for most of the game. Here he played h5, presumably just missing the power of queen b7, which Carlsen played, leading to an instant resignation. We'll get there in a moment, but first let's look at what Anand should have played in this position. Instead of h5, he should have played queen d2 or queen d4 with the idea of taking on f2 and delivering mate. Yeah, I mean this had to be dealt with one way or another. So white defends with queen takes f3, and after queen takes c2 he plays king g2 to hold f2 from the black queen. And there's immediate threats such as queen d5 check and queen f7 as we saw, and white is just ready to go on the rampage here. Black has the c5 pawn for counterplay, but in reality white is well ahead here. So Anand has to meet this threat of queen d5, so he can, for example, play king h8, pretty much forced in fact. So white can then play queen c6 with the threat of rook e8, which is forcing mate, and that means that white is keeping the initiative, and with it a growing advantage now at beyond 1.5 pawns, therefore close to winning. Moreover, such endgame positions are Carlsen's forte, so we can say with good confidence that the position was winning in any case, and Anand must have gone wrong earlier in the game. So we can see the final position now. After h5, Carlsen played queen b7, and as I said, Anand resigned immediately. White's e-file control has been transferred to domination of the 7th rank, and this is completely crushing. There is in fact no way to defend g7, and therefore no reasonable way to defend against mate. The computers suggest queen takes e7 here, which is obviously losing. White now has an advantage of over 9 pawns, and the position of course is completely hopeless, and Anand was correct to resign. So it was a very fast finish Vishy just missed this tactical move, and it was suddenly over when he could have, you know, struggled on for much longer. And he's usually a great tactical player, so it was surprising that he missed this. But there was a degree of time trouble involved, as I said, so he's not completely to blame. Although he is of course responsible for his time as well, I suppose. So anyway, he came out fighting, you know, in the first game, which I was very glad to see, and I sincerely hope he will not change his approach after this loss. On the contrary, if anything, I think it should make him play more aggressively. It would really do both him and the match good if he could get a win back against Carlsen. And you know, the risk when playing aggressively against Carlsen is of course that you can end up with a game such as this one, where Carlsen showed what a brilliant attacking player he can be. And the players have also exchanged some information regarding their openings, so it will be interesting to see how that influences the remaining rounds, and in particular the next few rounds. And the match of course is still in its early stages and anything can happen. Vishy got a grilling in the press conference, but it's vital that he doesn't despair, and he keeps up his form and his morale, and goes out with guns blazing as he did in game 1, which I think is definitely the best approach against Carlsen. On Tuesday he'll have white again, and it will be great to see what he tries. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.